Did you know that one of the most disappointing subclasses in all of Dungeons & Dragons just got a major upgrade? Let's take a look at how the 2024 Player's Handbook has taken the angriest of angry boys from zero to hero and turned it into an absolute monster. That's right, we're talking about the Berserker Barbarian. With the new book comes new rules and a lot of changes. Thankfully, this means new stuff for the path of the Berserker. But before we dive into the changes, let's quickly discuss the previous version of this subclass. The Berserker suffered, like many subclasses in the 2014 PHB, from a major disconnect between the mechanics it offered and the fantasy it tried to live up to. You see, the idea of being a blood-crazed savage foaming at the mouth like some rabid animal who then throws himself into combat and pushes their body past its limits, well, it's an incredibly iconic idea within fantasy and even our own history. The problem, however, is that we were punished severely in exchange for something you could get from many other sources. More than that, the later features in this subclass just didn't scale well with how a barbarian is built. With that being said, let's take a look at the changes and see why this subclass is now the best option for a barbarian, at least if damage dealing is the goal. We're going to start with the big change first, the feature you get at level 3 when you pick this subclass, Frenzy. This used to give you an extra attack that you could make as a bonus action if you entered a heightened rage, which sounds strong, but as I alluded to, most barbarians found a way to do this anyway. The downside was that you would gain a level of exhaustion after your rage ended, 6 points of exhaustion, and you die. That sounds like a reasonable trade until you realize that anything beyond 1 point of exhaustion severely handicaps your character and makes them almost unplayable. Because when you reach 2 points, your speed is halved. 3 points and you'll struggle to actually hit anything. It was just a horribly designed feature that didn't account for anything else that appeared in the book. But that's just my opinion. Nowadays, however, this feature is awesome. It's a lot simpler and you deal a bunch of extra damage when you hit something for the first time on each of your turns while raging. It scales with your rage damage bonus starting out at 2d6 and capping out at 4d6. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's basically the same feature as the Zealot Barbarian, except it's all dice and no flat numbers, which makes it better. Not only does this have very slightly higher damage, Frenzy interacts with crits, and that's where things start to get a bit wild. Moving on to the rest of the subclass features, there aren't that many changes. They're mostly just slight tweaks, but there are improvements all around. Mindless Rage is the 6th level feature, and it is pretty much the same with one difference. You can still enter a rage while affected by the Charmed and Frightened condition, but instead of suppressing it, you flat out get rid of it. It's definitely a small change, but it helps in those situations where you would get pulled out of your rage early. The 10th and 14th level features have now been swapped as well. Retaliate, the old capstone, is unchanged. Someone hits you and you use your reaction to hit them back. It now also clarifies that an unarmed strike can be made using this feature, so your weird dream of entering your character into illegal back alley slap fights is now a reality, although that might just be my dream. Intimidating Presence, the old 10th level feature, is now the capstone and it's vastly improved. This used to scale with your charisma modifier and take an action to use as well as an action on each subsequent turn to keep the effect going. It also only affected a single target. In theory, it was supposed to be a representation of the fear and dread a berserker could instill in their enemies. In practice, however, it would never work. It would waste your action and had a decent chance of leading to your rage ending because you would be doing something other than attacking your enemies. Now, this feature scales with your strength. It costs a bonus action to use, it lasts for up to a minute without any further actions required, and it affects everything you want in a 30-foot radius around your berserker. Need I say more? We can't just stop at the subclass changes though. We also need to take a look at the updates to the Barbarian class because they mesh really well with what the Berserker is trying to do, and you're gonna start noticing a bit of a theme. So, starting off with Rage, it's just better. It lasts significantly longer and doesn't require constant aggression to maintain. You can keep it going with a bonus action now, so punching yourself in the face isn't strictly necessary anymore, but maybe that's how you flavor your Berserker whenever they take this bonus action. There is also some added utility to the class. They get access to more skill proficiencies and can use their strength for certain ability checks while raging. This adds an element of mysticism to a barbarian's rage, but I think it's somewhat charming that a berserker gets so angry that they start to see better. Instinctive Pounce also made it into the book, and it's ripped straight out of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and it allows you to move when you activate your rage. More mobility is always awesome. Then we need to talk about the biggest mechanical change, Brutal Strike. This level 9 feature replaces Brutal Critical and gives all barbarians an active choice to make on their turn. On one of your attacks each turn, you can sacrifice some accuracy to deal additional damage and hinder the target in some really nasty ways. Not only does this add some combat utility to the Barbarian, but it also adds another way to stack damage on a single target, which is important for the Berserker. I will just mention that crit fishing builds are kind of dead, but Brutal Strike has a higher damage potential than Brutal Critical had because it's really gross when you get a crit the old-fashioned way. And finally, Barbarians also get access to Weapon Mastery, a new feature that makes your choice of favorite people opener actually matter. This also gives them some more interesting things to do in combat. Speaking of Weapon Mastery, let's very briefly cover some of the better options that a Berserker can take. The Cleave property is found on the Great Axe and the Halberd and allows you to hit an additional target. It's always nice to have better horde clearing potential, and this is probably the best option for a Berserker, unless you're fighting a single big target, in which case you probably want a graze weapon like the Greatsword. This property ensures that you deal a bit of damage even if you miss, and that will happen a bit more now that Brutal Strike exists. Then this one's for all of us who think more weapons are always the better option. Nick allows you to dual wield without using your bonus action to make the extra attack with a light weapon, instead doing so as part of the attack action. This also pairs very nicely with a certain feat. There are a few other weapon masteries that can be used to push, slow, knock down, or even make it harder for your opponent to hit you or easier for you to hit them, but these are things that the Barbarian can kind of do on its own anyway. Now, we can't exactly cover a martial subclass without looking at the feats because they unlock some pretty gross power, and just like everything else, we have a few changes. Regardless of how you feel, Great Weapon Master is still the highest damage option to take, but there are a few things to consider here. Overall, it deals less damage than it used to, but the extra damage you do doesn't interact with anything you do as a bonus action. That being said, it no longer nukes your accuracy, which wasn't exactly the biggest issue for Barbarians, but it's still a nice change. Whole Arm Master is still great and now also works with a lance for some reason, but this feat lacks some power now because of the Great Weapon Master changes. Dual Wielder is now very strangely worded, but can be paired with a Nick weapon to achieve some competitive damage. It's also a fun and different way to build a Barbarian. Then lifted straight from Tasha's Cauldron, Crusher, Piercer, and Slasher are all interesting options with some neat effects. Lastly, for our damage-focused feats, we have probably the most improved feat in the book, which is Charger. Instead of having to dash and sacrifice attacks, you can now just hit harder once per turn if you run at something. This adds another d8 damage onto the Berserker's already growing pool of dice. Then we have the origin feats that each character can take at level 1 for free. The choice is pretty clear and you're probably going to take Tough for the extra hit points, but Alert can have some interesting uses and pairs nicely with the Barbarian's already improved initiative rolls. Some other interesting choices are Durable for some hit dice healing and to deal with the fact that you will eventually go down and be forced to make death saves, and Speedy just to go faster. I will say that it is refreshing that there is a wide array of reasonably good feats for Barbarians to take now. Since we've already touched on everything else, we may as well quickly cover the best species for a Berserker. All of the species in the new PHB are decent options and there is no wrong choice. However, some lend themselves to the theme a bit better. Generally speaking, dwarves, dragonborn, and Aasimar make incredible barbarians. In summary, dwarves are thick and get more health. The version of the dragonborn in this book is the best version that has ever been published and gives access to a breath weapon and flight. And Aasimars are also exceptionally strong. They can enter their own angelic rage and even provide some healing. However, as you may have noticed, when I think of a berserker, there is one species that stands head and shoulders above the rest. Goliath's got a massive glow up in this book. You now choose what type of giant you're descended from, and this gives you an ability based on your lineage. All of the options are good, but most of them allow you to do extra damage when you hit something, which completes our dice stacking mission with the Berserker. Beyond that, Goliaths move faster and can now become large for some time each day. Not that an 8-foot tall miniature giant should ever be considered a medium-sized creature, but yeah, Goliath has taken over from the half-orc as the default barbarian species choice. So, with all of that being covered, is the path of the Berserker any good now? Yes, yep, it is crazy good now. If you just want to throw your character into combat and roll some dice without any concern for tactics or strategy, then this subclass is for you. And even if that doesn't describe what you generally want out of Dungeons and Dragons, we all get an itch to make a barbarian at least once in our lives. To give you a bit of an idea of what the Berserker is actually capable of, if you make it to max level, you take the Great Weapon Master and charge of feats, you max out your strength, you slap a great axe onto a Goliath descended from fire giants, and then manage to crit something in combat with Brutal Strike, you end up with an average damage of exactly 100. Which, by the way, is way beyond what any barbarian could achieve before now. And you can keep doing that turn after turn, assuming you can roll crits the old fashioned way. But even without a crit, the damage this class puts out is just gross. So, grab your dice, throw caution to the wind, and rip and tear. Anyhow, thanks for watching if you made it this far. Let me know what you think of the Berserker. Is it actually the best now, or am I just fixating on it? The Path of the World tree looks amazing too, by the way, and I'll admit that there are some crazy implications for some of the older subclasses when you take into account the new changes. The Beast and Wild Magic Barbarians can do some really janky stuff now. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.